Today is our monthly news and analysis episode arranged into an audio magazine in which we have 4 stories. I should probably point out that one of the big news stories for the month, the story of Runaway Railway, its opening at Disneyland, and the start of the 100 Years of Wonder, is handled in a standalone episode that we posted a couple of weeks back called Runaway Railway at Disneyland. If you haven't yet heard that, once this episode is over, go back and catch that one for the remainder of this month's news. But simply, it's been an absolutely crazy month with a lot going on. That earlier episode on Runaway Railway was over an hour, and by looking at the remaining script material for this episode will pan out around an hour as well. We have 4 stories, some of which will map out with clarity the future of the Disney company and why Disney executives are identifying certain strategies as important right now. 3 of these stories will take place primarily in the C-suite, the boardroom, and the halls of government, and one of these stories takes place in the theme parks. But before we get going, there's something I need to do. I need to thank another round of Bandcamp subscribers. It takes a lot of work each week to put these episodes together, and these are the people who make all of this possible. Gratitude is going out this week to Satwood, Dr. Newton, Jeremy, Lindsay, J-Dub, Kit S., Madam Leota Toombs, Michael G., Darren B., Cheryl T., MK Blasida, Brett, BJP, Michael O., Maddie G., Matt H., The Heroic Jess, EA Lyons, Rob Dunn, and Jonathan H. Thanks to each of you for making all of this possible. We've got a good episode with a lot of moving pieces that have been revised even as I've been recording today. There's stories of struggle, ambition, botched revenge, and good food. So if you're ready, we've got a lot to cover. Let's go. Some stories about the Disney company don't end in ways that you'd expect. And this is what we have here, an unusual story about power, corporate aggression, and shareholder authority, all of which serve to shape how the Disney company is reimagining itself in a post-Chapek world. But this is also a story with a strange turn or two. The turmoil around the Disney Board of Directors continues to circulate. In November, the Disney Board, led by Susan Arnold, removed Bob Chapek from his role as CEO and replaced him with former CEO Bob Iger, whose 2 primary responsibilities were to increase investor and customer confidence by undoing some of the damage absorbed during the Chapek era, and to identify a new successor, one who would better fit the Disney image. As for Chapek himself, as he was under a 3-year contract, he will still receive over $24 million for his work in 2022 despite being fired, and moving forward, he will receive a severance package valued at around $20 million. Other executives in Chapek's orbit, such as ousted Senior Vice President Jeff Morrell, will also receive millions, as the company removes the policy footprint of Chapek and returns the Disney company to something that resembles its identity back in 2019. But there are now additional layers of concern as the company seeks to reset its identity. To begin with, Chairperson Susan Arnold, the person who oversaw the removal of Bob Chapek, is being timed out from the board as she has reached the 15-year maximum set in the company's charter. She had joined the board back in 2007. In 2021, she became the first female chairperson of the Disney company, and as 2022 came to a close, the board was required to retire her as a director. In January, the company elected Mark Parker, previously the CEO of Nike, to be the next chairperson of the Disney board, a decision that will become effective at the 2023 shareholders meeting. Typically, Disney holds this meeting in March, though it may be slightly delayed this year due to another set of problems that we're about to discuss. During these same weeks, as the Disney company was struggling with the problems caused by Chapek, and as its stock dropped from nearly $200 down to $84 per share, an activist investors group, Tryon Partners, led by the 80-year-old investor Nelson Peltz, started to have talks with Disney about the future of the company. For any large company, the appearance of Nelson Peltz would be a point of concern. Peltz had a history of targeting undervalued companies, that is, companies with strong fundamentals whose stock was presently undervalued, and then purchasing millions of dollars of stock and advocating that the company follow Tryon's directives to quickly increase value. One of his tools, used repeatedly, was to engage publicly held companies in a proxy fight. A proxy fight, or a proxy contest, is a situation where dissatisfied investors, such as Nelson Peltz, arrange their own slate of nominees to replace or partially replace board members for a publicly held company. Investors can withhold their support from the company's slate of nominees and instead choose to support or partially support nominees put forward by someone like Peltz. If Peltz's nominees are placed onto the board of directors, it can force a company into a situation where it must heed Tryon's direction. In 2006, Peltz arranged a proxy fight with Heinz, hoping to replace 5 current board members with 5 independent members chosen by Tryon. In the end, Tryon was able to change out 2 members, which put Nelson Peltz on the board. In 2015, Tryon tried to put 4 independent members onto the DuPont board, another company they felt was undervalued. In 2017, Tryon attempted to do the same thing with Procter & Gamble. According to Procter & Gamble, Peltz narrowly lost that proxy vote, but he was still named to the board so as to move his position from one of antagonism to one of support. In each instance, the proxy contests were destabling and cost the host company millions. In Peltz's view, these proxy contests were useful in helping these companies focus on underlying fundamentals to quickly improve the value of their stock, though some board members might suggest that these proxy contests were a distraction from long-term company goals and forced the company instead to focus on quick returns. Regardless, in the world of investments, Tryon and its CEO Nelson Peltz were known entities that companies would be ill-advised to simply brush off, especially if their stock had recently lost tremendous value, which was clearly the case for Disney. According to SEC filings, in July 2022, Nelson Peltz began to talk with executives and directors at Disney about how Disney might better leverage its value for investors. Of particular concern to Peltz was the Disney stock dividend, which was suspended in 2015. Peltz believed the dividend was suspended in part due to the substantial sum needed to purchase Fox, a purchase that Peltz concluded had not been in Disney's best interests. Peltz met on July 11th with Bob Chapek at Disneyland Paris for a business lunch. A few days later, on July 16th, he had a second conversation where he indicated he was interested in joining the Disney board. He explained that he was not yet a Disney investor, but if he was added to the board, he would become a significant investor and his seat would advocate for the interest of shareholders. Disney, however, was unreceptive to this offer. By this point, Peltz had the support of one significant investor, Isaac Perlmutter, chairman of Marvel Entertainment, who, after Marvel was purchased by Disney, had acquired about $600 million worth of Disney stock. Assuming that Perlmutter hasn't bought or sold Disney stock in the intervening years, Perlmutter would now own roughly about $2.5 billion in Disney stock, or roughly 1% of the company. For years now, Perlmutter has been upset that CEO Bob Iger restructured Kevin Feige's position at Marvel Studios. Before 2015, producer Kevin Feige was the creative officer and president of Marvel Studios and reported to Perlmutter, allowing Perlmutter to oversee the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But after 2015, Feige reported directly to Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, minimizing Perlmutter's influence on the Marvel films, a situation that played out well for Disney, with films like Infinity War, Endgame, Captain Marvel, and Black Panther, but a situation that did not play out well for Perlmutter, an executive who was, in a way, sidelined. It may also be useful here to point out that, according to the Financial Times, Nelson Peltz and Isaac Perlmutter appear to be friends. Both have residencies in Palm Beach and have attended social events together, including the wedding reception for Peltz's daughter last April. One photograph, again according to the Financial Times, shows Perlmutter and Peltz, along with Jim Cramer, host of the CNBC show Mad Money, together. Cramer, who has been critical of Disney in recent days and also instrumental in gaining investor support for the removal of Chapek, will figure into this story a little bit later. In July, Isaac Perlmutter of Marvel told the Disney board that he supported Peltz's request to have a seat as a director, as it would help correct recent problems in the company. There were without doubt deep problems with Chapek's tenure as CEO, but the board at this point may have also been able to read Perlmutter's support through another lens. It would be an effective way for Perlmutter to grieve Disney's decision to distance him from Marvel Studios through the potentially disruptive influence of Nelson Peltz. Perlmutter, though, was not the only large shareholder of Disney. There were others, including investment funds, George Lucas, and Steve Jobs' widow, Lorraine Jobs, who eventually acquired the stock stemming from Disney's acquisition of Pixar. Any of these individuals or firms could be equally important in a proxy battle decided by shareholder votes if it came down to that. But at the moment, Perlmutter was the only major shareholder to side with Nelson Peltz. Between July and November, Peltz's firm acquired $500 million in Disney stock and planned to increase its holdings up to $1 billion. Peltz undoubtedly followed the November Disney earnings call and saw how poorly Chapek performed, also how badly the investment community reacted to Disney's admission that its streaming service had recently lost $1.5 billion in a bid to gain a larger subscriber base. During the call, analysts aggressively directed questions to Chapek about the situation at Disney+, signaling that a $1.5 billion loss was far larger than any of them had anticipated. With Disney in a weakened position, Peltz informed Bob Chapek, who was then still CEO of the company, that Disney would either appoint Peltz to the board or that Peltz and his firm would lobby investors to vote for a slate of nominees that they would put forward to populate the board with individuals sympathetic to Peltz's view about how the company should move forward. Subsequently, members of the board met with Peltz and others from Tryon to listen to their concerns. Peltz expressed dissatisfaction with the Disney acquisition of Fox. He pointed out that Disney stock had lost tremendous value in recent years and that the board was not sufficiently focused on recouping value in the months ahead. He said that it was essential in the current economic environment that Disney cut costs. Members of the Disney board asked if Tryon would be open to adding a mutually agreed-upon independent board member to the Disney board. Specifically, Disney directors asked if Tryon would be persuaded to shift its current activist position to one of mutual support, to which Peltz said they were only willing to abandon their proxy battle if Peltz was added himself to the board. After both Peltz and Iger left the meeting, the Disney board voted unanimously not to appoint Peltz to the board, citing that his previous board experience was largely in companies focused on products, companies such as Procter & Gamble and Heinz, and not in international entertainment conglomerates, which for Disney included key areas in leisure, outdoor amusements, media entertainment, and technology, all outside the scope of Peltz's previous experience. The Tryon presentation and the estimate of board members never accounted for how the entertainment ecosystem had radically changed in the 3 previous years, and as a result, Tryon and Peltz never put forward a meaningful strategy that would, with insight and depth, help Disney grow in this new post-pandemic world in which viewers were leaving theaters and migrating to streaming services, in which labor remained tight, and in which theme parks and the cruise ships remain difficult to manage due to the public's new sensitivity to possible contagion. Without experience in the entertainment business, the value of Peltz's input, the board concluded, would be minimal. At best, he would be a disruptor that questioned the current strategies designed to move the company beyond the problems of the Chapek era. The board felt that it was presently best to defer to Iger, who had deep experience with the Disney company, rather than to add the distraction of Peltz into the mix. In early January, Disney informed Peltz that though Peltz would not be added as a director, Disney board members hoped to enter meaningful discussions with Peltz to improve the state of the Disney company and to avoid a costly and damaging proxy battle. If Peltz agreed to abandon activist activities, Disney would invite Peltz to meet quarterly with executives and share some data not publicly available. The Disney board also pointed out that at this time, Iger had only resumed his role as CEO the previous month and that he should be given ample time without new influences such as Peltz to improve the company. Peltz rejected this offer, explaining that it was, in his opinion, an offer designed to do little more than mollify his concerns and that he would instead continue to advocate for the improvement of Disney through a proxy fight, in which he intended to seat himself through a vote of investors onto the Disney Board of Directors. Tryon and Peltz then produced a web page designed to persuade investors through their votes to place Peltz on the Disney board. The website, called RestoreTheMagic.com, highlights how Disney stock had lost tremendous value, largely during Chapek's tenure, a period that also overlapped with the pandemic, deep changes in the film and media ecosystem, and unique challenges for the theme parks and cruise line. The site then highlighted 2 areas that Peltz believed were key factors in the devaluation of Disney stock. First, poor planning in terms of developing Disney Plus, combined with a strategy to overcharge on products at the parks, which one can assume means everything from admission tickets to food to Genie Plus, in an attempt to subsidize losses on the streaming service. Second, poor capital investment, particularly with the purchase of Fox for $71 billion, which, according to Peltz, led to a discontinuation of the stock dividend. He also felt that Disney needed to cut costs, which likely meant lower capital investments and a slightly smaller workforce. On a personal note here, let me jump in for a second. Though the name of Peltz's site, Restore the Magic, uses the language of the fan community, particularly the community of theme park fans, the magic that Peltz primarily wants to restore is shareholder value and a yearly dividend. And the tone of this new proxy battle is very different than the tone of 2004's Save Disney campaign, in which the center of discussion back then was focused far more on improving the quality of theme parks and films and retaining highly talented creative individuals to lead company projects. On Thursday, January 12th on CNBC, Jim Cramer, who was instrumental in calling for the removal of Bob Chapek, now advocated that Disney place Peltz on its board of directors. Now someone like Peltz, he said, who has been tremendously successful, wants to join them, and they act like that's a problem. This endorsement further elevated Peltz's platform for the public. But then things got a little murky. Peltz modified his position to explain that the vote would be arranged so that either he or his son Matthew could occupy a seat on the Disney board if Peltz was unable to do so himself. Peltz was, of course, 80 and would turn 81 in a few months, But his son Matthew's primary experience on a board was with Wendy's, another firm tied to Tryon, and the possibility of placing Peltz's son, who had even less experience with entertainment companies than Peltz himself, would seem almost surely to weaken the terms of this proxy proposal. Still, the impetus of the proxy fight moved ahead. In a letter to shareholders, Disney explained its position. "Nelson Peltz does not understand Disney's businesses," it said, "and lacks the skills and experience to assist the board in delivering shareholder value in a rapidly shifting media ecosystem." Disney then identified 4 key goals targeted by the current board, and I'm guessing that these goals were all carefully crafted to demonstrate that Disney was confronting the issues identified by Peltz and could handle them without him. Or to put this bluntly, they were suggesting that Peltz's presence was unnecessary to manage them. There were 4 goals identified by the board which overlap with some concerns raised by Peltz. 1. To bring the Disney Plus streaming service to a point of profitability. 2. To streamline production and better manage costs to increase profitability throughout the company. 3. To reorganize leadership and to put decision-making power back in the hands of creative teams, not in management's hands. And 4. To undo the public relations problems brought on by Chapek's mandates and to return value and flexibility to the theme parks. Again, as a personal side note, I believe that this final item here indicates that the board means to move the parks to some extent away from all those upcharges and from overly scheduled systems for park reservations, shows, dinings, and so on, which has lowered guest satisfaction in recent years. That is, the board laid out a plan to combat the popular narrative that Disney parks are now not only expensive, but they're overly regimented to the point of diminished satisfaction. Tryon, on its Restore the Magic webpage, explained that it had engaged in 3 previous proxy contests, with Heinz in 2006, DuPont in 2015, and Procter & Gamble in 2017. In all 3 proxy contests, the site advised, we heard similar rhetoric to that which Disney and its advisors are using today to oppose Nelson's election to the Disney board. In Tryon's view, each proxy fight had brought positive changes to the company, even if Tryon was unsuccessful in getting some or all of its nominees on a company's board. Tryon also urged that Disney shareholders in the weeks ahead specifically withhold their votes for current board member Michael Froman, who outside of Disney was president of strategic growth for MasterCard and had long experience in international business and global trade. From 2013 to 2017, Froman served as U.S. Trade Representative under President Obama, which should give Disney meaningful perspective to further promote Disney Plus, its parks, and other products in countries outside of the U.S. It's unclear, at least to me, why Peltz targeted Froman as the person whose seat he wanted to occupy. But this dispute between Peltz and Disney has exposed movements within the boardroom for investors and fans to consider with new clarity. One interesting revelation here is how concerned the board is about a growing dissatisfaction among consumers and even longtime fans. Tryon may have had useful criticisms of Disney's recent performance, but also, at least up until this point in our story, which would be the beginning of February, the board, by removing Chapek back in November, was at least engaged in addressing these concerns, or some of them. The board was also signaling that they were more interested in long-term solutions, which ideally would create a gradual rise in stock price rather than a quick rise that might be more advantageous to certain types of investors. The next chapter in this story will come through on the February earnings call. This will be the first time that Bob Iger has managed a quarterly earnings call since returning as CEO. Almost surely, Iger and his team will want to highlight how they are working through current problems, particularly those highlighted by pelts, such as losses around the streaming service. Iger will probably also want to discuss his plans to select a new successor. Among the highlights will be the box office gross from Avatar 2. Iger, it is assumed, will explore ways that the company can cut costs, as that was a key item on Peltz's list as well. But again, I'll give you the heads up here. Though proxy cards are already set to go out, though Peltz has identified exactly who he wants to replace on the Disney board, this story is going to take an unexpected turn, one that no one saw coming. But still, the structure of this battle will shape how Iger and the board map out the immediate future of the Disney company and what the Disney experience will be like in the years to come. And we'll return to this story when we talk about the earnings call at the end of this episode. One of the stories that we've been following for a year now concerns the Reedy Creek Improvement District in Florida. This is that special district enacted in 1967 that created a special governing district around Walt Disney World. Disney World actually pays higher taxes compared to other Florida businesses for the upkeep of roads, oversight of utilities, arrangement of first responders, and other important but routine services inside of that district. Though this was news to many government officials who voted to dissolve that district last year. It was also news for them that many of these services are actually guest-centered. There are no toll roads. First responders don't charge guests for ambulance transportation for medical services, and problems within the district, such as storm damage and potholes, are usually fixed incredibly quickly. These costs are all absorbed by Reedy Creek, which has the ability to tax Disney to pay for them and not by guests. The backstory, of course, is this. In 2022, Disney executives opposed what is commonly called Florida's Don't Say Gay bill. This came after a period in which Bob Chapek, who was then the CEO, wavered and attempted to appear apolitical before finally voicing opposition and saying that Disney would advocate for the bill's repeal. The Florida legislature then passed a 2-page bill to dissolve the Reedy Creek Improvement District, with most members believing that the district was used to lower Disney's taxes. But as the governor and the legislature quickly realized that the exact opposite was true, that Disney actually paid higher taxes for upkeep of the area, a policy mess slowly unfolded, as the district was set to be dissolved on June 1st, 2023, with some other government entity, likely the nearby counties, absorbing both Reedy Creek's bond debt and the higher tax burden of managing a resort area that has very few residents but requires tremendous upkeep. The two counties where Disney World resides, that is Orange and Osceola counties, have both said that they lack the funds to manage roads and emergency services for Disney's 43 square mile resort without additional funding, such as funding uniquely provided by a special district. At the end of 2022, both the legislature and the governor in Florida appeared to acknowledge that the initial bill had been hastily assembled without fully understanding the facts, and repeatedly, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis explained that there would be new legislation forthcoming that would both fix the problems with the first bill and also limit Disney's ability to coordinate with Reedy Creek by populating its board with people who were former Disney employees. There was also this added problem. Though some Florida citizens may not have liked Disney's stance on cultural or political issues, no officials have accused Reedy Creek of being negligent or derelict in their duties. To be fair, there have been some disagreements as to how to allocate the Reedy Creek budget or the quickness with which some road projects were completed, but certainly no more than any other city or special district. And this, I think, suggests that the underlying motivation to change Reedy Creek was something other than a substantial defect in the operations of the current Reedy Creek district. On January 6th, Florida officials indicated that they were exploring the possibility of keeping Reedy Creek, or at least some version of Reedy Creek, but replacing the locally elected board members with board members appointed by the state. The state-controlled board in the existing district would ensure that taxes on Disney would be used both to pay back bond debt and to manage those unique infrastructure burdens around Disney World. On February 1st, Governor DeSantis explained that a bill was now actively in the works to more effectively take control of Reedy Creek. "We're not going to have a corporation controlling its own government," DeSantis said in Tallahassee while at a news conference. "That's going to be reverted to the state. I'd rather it be the local governments, but I don't think that they're prepared for it. So the state is going to have a board to run it." The governor also indicated that the legislature would hold a special session to explore how to remedy the unique problems created with the pending dissolution of Reedy Creek, a dissolution that now no one really wants. Roughly 1 week later, on Monday, February 6th, a draft of the bill was released. The new bill, at 189 pages, was far more informed than what Reedy Creek actually did and did not do, as opposed to that 2-page bill initially passed the previous year. Instead of dissolving the district as provided in that previous bill, this new bill would allow for Reedy Creek to continue to exist, but with a few key changes. First, it would no longer be called Reedy Creek, but within 2 years have its name changed to the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District. And yes, I know that name just rolls off the tongue. As the district now would remain intact except for the name, the district would retain its bond debt. It would also continue to raise taxes to support the roads and other services inside the district. From a legal standpoint now, I think, the most troubling part is how that board of supervisors will be selected. Traditional supervisors are elected by those living in the district. Reedy Creek has somewhere around 80 residents who elect these supervisors. In this revised plan, the governor would now nominate new board members with these nominations conferred by the state senate. This would effectively disenfranchise the voting rights of those who live in the district, which I'm guessing gives those residents, likely backed by Disney, a powerful legal challenge to this new bill. Presently, the Reedy Creek Board is mostly aligned with Disney World in terms of how the land is developed and maintained, also in how permits are issued for the resort itself. If the state appoints supervisors, the level of cooperation between Disney and the district might change. The bill in its current form prevents anyone who has had a professional relationship with a theme park company during the previous 3 years from serving on the board. The definition here is pretty broad. It includes, and I'll quote the bill, an officer, owner, director, employee, agent, contractor, or subcontractor of, or has had a contractual relationship entity that owns or operates a theme park or entertainment complex, or a parent company, subsidiary, or sibling organization under common ownership or control with a business entity that owns or operates a theme park. So basically no one with any professional relationship with a division of Disney over the previous 3 years can be on the board. The bill also removes some of Disney's previous abilities, such as the ability granted back in 1967 to build a nuclear power plant, a provision that was made when Disney was actively planning its own city, which would have been called Epcot and has since morphed into a theme park. At this point, with this new bill, it seems very likely that the issue will end up in court. There's a number of approaches that Disney might use. First, that the original decision to dissolve Reedy Creek was initially presented as a retaliation to political opinions held by Disney, which are protected under free speech. Or second, this new bill with its mandate to place government-appointed candidates on the board, violates the rights of those who live in Reedy Creek, specifically their ability to elect their own supervisors, the same as other residents do in other districts and cities. Of course, in terms of legal remedy, nothing can be done on Disney or the residents' part until they are harmed with actual damage, and this means after a bill is put in place. And even then, I suspect Disney will assess the level of harm and will then determine if they want to pursue a legal remedy. In ways, I think, looking back on all this, the off-ramp here for all parties, Disney and the state, probably should have been the ousting of Bob Chapek. 2 months ago, everyone could have pointed to Chapek and his team as exacerbating the underlying issues. Disney could have said that though the company remains deeply invested in a culture of inclusion, that Chapek's advocacy of these goals was inconsistent and at times out of step with more conventional ways that the company traditionally chooses to communicate its beliefs. And the state could have said that a large part of the issue for them was the manner in which Chapek communicated the company's stance. But oddly, no one took that off-ramp. So here we are, very predictably, in a situation where the state now does not want to dissolve the district, as that would be a massive tax loss that would need to be made up somewhere else by likely increasing taxes on other residents. Yet, the same government now needs to present the Reedy Creek issue as a political win, even if that win is constructed on some shaky constitutional ground. And Disney, correspondingly, is being driven closer to a position where they may need to defend themselves by bringing suit against Florida, which of course will not be cheap. And to focus in on where things stand right now, maybe it's best just to point out that the original 2-page bill that was hastily put together last year now requires a 189-page second bill that may or may not fix the initial problems. Many sections in our update this month are focused on the political and boardroom intrigue over at the Disney company. But before we jump back to that, I want to touch down at least for a few minutes to look at the parks. 2 weeks ago, we looked at updates to the Disneyland Resort in an episode called Runaway Railway at Disneyland, which focused on recent changes in California. We aren't quite to the point where there's a new attraction open to the public in Florida, but we are starting to see movement in other areas. One of those areas is the full character dining experience. Some character meals have been back for months, but mostly it's been furry characters with full masks. But princess meals, where performers move between tables and offer hugs and handshakes to young guests, are returning only now. Akershus, with princesses moving between tables as part of the Norway Pavilion, opened at the very end of last year, and Cinderella's Royal Table, which has been open for a while now, but only with Cinderella in the entry room far from the tables, will return at the end of February with the full range of face characters moving around the restaurant. Character meals have a unique history at the resort. They started somewhat surprisingly over at Lake Buena Vista, or what is now called Disney Springs, using a famous children's character, but not one that was owned by Disney. On December 3rd, 1978, in the Orlando paper, Disney, in an attempt to increase local interest in its shopping village, created a holiday event for area families. It enacted its very first character breakfast, a breakfast that featured Santa Claus. On Saturday morning, December 9th at 8:30 a.m., Santa says parents are invited to join their kids and feast on scrambled eggs or cereal, orange juice, hash browns, bacon, sausage, Danish, and milk or coffee. There's plenty for second helpings, too. Afterwards, kids can open their surprises from Santa. He'll stay to chat for a while and then wander over for a look at the village Christmas tree. This morning of fun is priced at just $4 per child and $5 per adult. The event was held on the Empress Lily, a restaurant arranged as a steamship which is now called Paddlefish. The concept proved to be a success, so much so that 4 months later Disney announced that it would do something similar for Easter. On the day before Easter, Saturday, April 14th, Disney held a kids' breakfast in the same location on the Empress Lily with a visit from its rabbits, a costumed Easter bunny, and also the White Rabbit from Alice in Wonderland. Kids again enjoyed a hot breakfast for $4 and also received an Easter-related gift. Adults were once again $5. From there, the idea of breakfast quickly took hold. As it did, the audience shifted from local families in Orlando to those on vacation. On April 6th, Disney World announced that beginning May 5th, there will be Walt Disney character breakfast aboard the Empress Lily riverboat every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. 6 months later, Eastern Airlines, which was then the official airline of Walt Disney World, offered an exclusive Goofy breakfast on property, which would also feature Mickey, Pluto, and other Disney favorites for customers on selected Eastern vacations. At this point, in less than 1 year, the character breakfast had quickly established themselves as part of the Disney World experience. And from there, over decades, Disney saw value in creating a range of character meals. The meals entice parents into booking a reservation at an upper-end restaurant, and in return, they receive direct attention from Disney characters, typically a lot of them. And it's the type of personalized attention that families can't get in the parks outside of a few photo experiences where characters will repeatedly pose and engage in conversation. The character meals are also far more relaxed and natural interactions, as there's no PhotoPass photographer attempting to arrange the family into various poses. Now for the downside. The food at many of these character-focused restaurants is less than ideal. It's very hard to recommend Chef Mickey's. The food at Crystal Palace is mid-range at best, and if you go to Cinderella's Royal Table, you should go for the atmosphere, which is lovely. The space is arranged in the upper floor of the castle with windows looking out into Fantasyland Courtyard. There's also history in this space too. This is the location where key Imagineers such as John Hench celebrated during the final days of construction as the Magic Kingdom was moving toward opening. To be fair, in terms of the food, the desserts are excellent. The chocolate mousse with caramel pralines and a hazelnut gelato is easily the best dessert in the park. Also, one of the appetizers is very good. The Prince Edward's mussels arranged in a coconut curry base and served with garlic crostini. But outside of this, the entrees leave a lot to be desired. In terms of steaks, the filet here is toward the bottom of my list of steaks available at the resort, and the flavors on the pork tenderloin never really come together. The last time I was dining in the castle, which was just a few weeks ago, I was surprised to see people at multiple tables around me actually sending their entrees back to the kitchen. One person at a table next to me sent her entree back twice. Disney restaurants are typically very good, and it's been a long time since I've seen anything like this. Later this month, when princesses return to the castle restaurant, it will regain its full experience, which will help, but this still is a place for atmosphere more so than for food. But the food, atmosphere, and experience all work out far better over at Akershus in Epcot. Years ago, Akershus was reimagined as a second princess dining location at the resort, specifically to take pressure off of Cinderella's Royal Table. Again, this is a high-priced experience with a significant amount of value priced into the character interactions, so you'll need to feel that the experience of the characters justifies the price if you dine here. Large sections of the Norway Pavilion are modeled after the actual Akershus Castle and its cobblestone plaza in Oslo Harbor, including, of course, the Akershus restaurant. When the pavilion was preparing to open in the late 1980s, Disney chefs, led by John Roos, made repeated trips to Norway to identify Scandinavian dishes to feature at the first authentic Norwegian restaurant to open in the U.S. in decades. Some of the original buffet items included cucumber salad, cabbage dishes, salmon, meatballs, and marinated herring, which was served cold. Akershus was originally arranged as an international restaurant, much like Chefs de France or Beer Garden elsewhere in World Showcase. In 2002, the princesses were then added to Akershus for a character breakfast. I'm not really sure that you want to know what the price was back then. This was just over 20 years ago, but back then, this character breakfast cost $16 for adults and $9 for kids. Because of its popularity, not long after that, the princesses were also featured at lunch and dinner. During this period, the restaurant featured a Taste of Norway appetizer buffet, which included cheese and cabbage and chilled or pickled fish. The plated entrees were more friendly to American tastes, including meatballs, salmon, and roast chicken. And this menu remained at Akershus up until the resort closed for the pandemic, somewhat of a cross between samples of Norway and a princess meal. And even from these descriptions, you can see the oddity of this blend. Chilled herring on the one hand, and 5-year-olds who want to see Sleeping Beauty. And they just don't go together very well. Like many face character experiences such as the Little Mermaid Grotto and Enchanted Tales with Belle, Akershus, as a restaurant at least, remained closed for the rest of 2020, all of 2021, and nearly all of 2022, finally reopening a couple months ago with an updated menu. Before the pandemic, Akershus offered a salad buffet with various chilled fish dishes, followed by a plated entree. One of the improvements here is that the menu has been greatly simplified, with all dishes brought to your table family style. And the entree selections that remain on the menu all lean toward more familiar American tastes, which works well in this restaurant, as the overall experience is arranged towards families with children. Overall, the menu changes here follow trends already moving through the resort. Signature restaurants arranged for adults, such as Jico at Animal Kingdom Lodge, still offer selections that reasonably represent the cuisine of the host country. But table service restaurants arranged for families, such as Boma at Animal Kingdom Lodge, have modified many dishes to meet American tastes, while still including subtle hints of world cuisine. Not long ago, both Jico and Boma offered the traditional African dish pop, which is a cornmeal porridge. Jico still offers pop, which is served with chakalaka, a traditional spicy relish. Boma, though, now serves an Americanized version of this dish, which they call sweet corn pudding. International table service restaurants at Disney World, if they do offer authentic dishes outside of typical American tastes, have mostly relegated them now to appetizers and small plates, leaving the entrees arranged to flavors more familiar to the American palate. This is exactly what has happened at Akershus. The first course at Akershus has elements that are the furthest from American cuisines. It consists of greens with lingonberry vinaigrette and lefse, which is a potato flatbread with the thinness of a crepe. And then the main course consists of many dishes that generally gesture to Norwegian cuisine, but feature flavor and texture combinations familiar to most Americans. Also, as the restaurant is now family style, all of these dishes are served to every table. You no longer need to select just one. They include chicken and dumplings, salmon and green beans, meatballs with a berry sauce and mashed potatoes, mac and cheese, and red cabbage. The other menu area, where table service restaurants like Akershus lean in for more authentic dishes, is with desserts. Here, Akershus serves rice pudding with strawberry sauce, which is a traditional Christmas dessert in Norway. Also, a chocolate rolled cake. The staff shortages, sadly, are still significant. I was there at 6 p.m. on a weekend, and around me there were 6 empty tables, about a third of the room in which I sat, which remained empty the entire time I was there. This increases the difficulty of finding reservations. The main draw for most families with young children is to spend personal time with the princesses. Typically, there are 5 princesses who circulate through the dining hall, stopping to talk and pose for photos. Also, in terms of servers, the cultural representatives are back. So your server should be part of a cultural exchange program from Norway. That is, your server, typically someone in their young 20s, will know how the dishes of Akershus do and don't relate to meals that they have grown up with back home. But in this, we're starting to see another wave of offerings, some of which have been closed for nearly 3 years, finally return to the Florida resort. But as they return, they also arrive with changes. In our final segment today, we'll talk about the earnings call and how it relates to the stories we highlighted earlier in this episode. 2 days before the earnings call, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis released a draft of the bill that would end the dissolution of Reedy Creek and instead simply rename it the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District and then place the Board of Supervisors under the state's control. What was clear in the hours after it was released was that the largest point of contention was how much power the governor would then have over the Disney resort. Theoretically, a governor upset with Disney could nominate supervisors who could either slow down developments or move the district in a way that did not align with the resort's plans. Admittedly, these are extreme examples, as no one is being served by damaging the Florida tourism industry, but the locus of control was beneath many amendments that various individuals and groups proposed for the bill. These were largely proposed by Democrats to prevent a Republican governor and Senate from exercising control over land central to a private company. Specifically, multiple people proposed that the state give power to select those supervisors to others beyond the governor. Representative Anna Escamani from Orange County, Florida, proposed that 1 member shall be the mayor of Orange County, 1 member shall be the chair of the Osceola Board of County Commissioners, 1 member shall be the mayor of Orlando, and 1 member shall be the mayor of Kissimmee. Others proposed that the governor not be allowed to appoint individuals with whom he was affiliated or who had donated to his campaign. The battle lines as they unfolded focused on who would have the power to appoint board members if they were no longer elected by residents. The bill becomes law as soon as it's passed, so in theory the state has the ability to remove all the supervisors the moment it's signed by the governor, though the state has already indicated that they will let current supervisors continue to serve until suitable replacements are found. The bill was set for discussion on Wednesday afternoon, a meeting that would overlap with the earnings call, which meant that Disney executives, while on the earnings call, wouldn't have time to respond to any elements discussed that day in the Florida legislature. Earnings calls, in general, seek to present a company's recent and future performance in the best possible light, and then after the presentation is over, analysts are expected to ask questions focused on more sensitive areas. The first quarter earnings call was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon, just after markets closed in New York. Before the call began, there were 3 background forces that were clearly going to shape this call. First, Nelson Peltz and his proxy fight, whom we've already discussed. Next, the transition from Chapek to Iger, as this would be the first earnings call overseen by Iger in years. And finally, the economy. And let me jump in here for a moment to quickly discuss how that relates to Disney in the current moment. Whether we're presently in a recession or not, it's clear that a meaningful segment of the public is concerned about a downward turn in the economy to the point where they are not booking Disney World vacations. Just check any Disney World site and you'll see significant discounts for hotels up to 35% off all the way through summer. This is a clear sign that hotel bookings for the next 7 months are down. Beyond this, demand for the Galactic Star Cruiser is so soft that Disney has shuttered many excursions this summer. The Star Wars Hotel was originally designed to be in continual use. But for much of the summer, the Star Cruiser will run one excursion and then the entire complex will sit empty for 3 days before another round of guests arrive. Those people who have booked an excursion that was later canceled, and I've heard that this was a very small number, were given a 50% discount to move their reservation to another excursion slot. Anyway, I realize that economists are still trying to put an economic label on this current moment, a period with strong jobs numbers, but with high inflation. And even though there isn't an agreed-upon title, something like a supply-side recession, the public overall is gun-shy about pulling the trigger on an expensive vacation, which means for Disney parks at least, the current situation for most intents and purposes will act like a recession. From the start, it was clear that the earnings call was arranged around a multi-pronged agenda, with each announcement tied to a key concern. One of the first areas that Bob Iger tackled was to outline how his agenda was different than that of Bob Chapek. The key change here concerns how Chapek organized film and media releases. Chapek created a division that oversaw the release of film properties separate from those who created the films. Though Pixar may have created Turning Red, for example, a separate division decided how that film was released to the public, in this case by putting it on Disney+, not to theaters. Iger planned to undo that, giving back both creative control and financial responsibility to the creators of the film properties. Pixar, for example, would now be deeply involved in strategies to release their films, but on the flip side, they would also be financially responsible for their outcome. Whereas, under Chapek, the division that decided the method of release bore financial responsibility for the film as well. In this, Iger announced that he was returning more control to the individual studios, including Pixar, Lucas, and Marvel, for the films that they created. The next area concerned the economy and the popular narrative that Disney parks have become too expensive for many families. About the parks, Iger said, "It is clear that some of our pricing initiatives were alienating to our customers. I've always believed, by the way, that accessibility is a core value of the Disney brand. We were not perceived to be as accessible or as affordable to many segments as we probably should have been. So after basically paying heed to what we've been hearing, we started to address it." The stated solution here is to expand the number of low-cost days at the parks. That is, those days where admission is at the lowest level of the pricing scale. But in this, I believe there's a subtext. I also wouldn't expect any large price increases in the immediate future. Likewise, there may be a reevaluation of some of the current add-ons, such as Genie Plus and Lightning Lanes. I don't think that Genie Plus or Lightning Lanes are going away anytime soon, but we might see an increase in low-cost days for these products as well. Beyond this, it's clear that the narrative that the Disney parks are expensive is troubling for Iger and for others on the board. So I expect there will be other adjustments in this category as we move forward that will be announced as making the parks more accessible to the middle class, but also will function to attract more guests to the parks during this period of economic uncertainty. Last, there were those corporate changes that were specifically tied to Nelson Peltz's critique of the company and his proxy fight. These responses were wider than I'd expected, which suggests that the board was genuinely concerned that Peltz might be successful in his proxy bid and then disrupt long-term plans presently being arranged inside the company. Iger began by explaining that he would reduce costs by reorganizing the company. Under our strategic reorganization, he explained, there will be 3 core business segments: Disney Entertainment, ESPN, and Disney Parks Experiences and Products. Essentially, all media would be grouped together, and all experiences such as parks, the cruise line adventures, along with products would be grouped into their own division as well. ESPN would occupy its own division, and though Iger insisted that Disney wasn't looking to sell off ESPN, having it in its own division would certainly make it easy to do so if Disney changed its mind or if the opportunity presented itself. ESPN, a key brand, has always been an outlier at Disney in that it doesn't relate strongly to the films, nor does it relate strongly to the parks. This reorganization would also allow Disney to reduce the number of people it employs by 7,000, which would be achieved through the present hiring freeze and also through additional layoffs. 7,000 employees is roughly 3% of the company's overall employee base, a troubling, though relatively small percentage compared to the current layoffs at tech companies. Beyond this, Disney will review costs for film and TV production, almost certainly with an eye to minimize losses at Disney+, which has hemorrhaged money this past year. Between these areas, the reduction of content costs, the reduction of marketing costs, and the reduction in operating costs, which means labor, Iger believed that he could reach a target of $5.5 billion in cost savings across the company this next year. Next on the Peltz list was the dividend. Though Peltz has blamed the loss of the dividend on the Fox purchase, Iger pointed to the pandemic and the unique financial hardships it brought to the company. Now that the pandemic's impacts to our business are largely behind us, he said, we intend to ask the board to approve the reinstatement of the dividend by the end of the calendar year. Iger also indicated that it would be a modest dividend, at least this year. Lastly, about the financial losses at Disney+, company CFO Christine McCarthy said, we are reaffirming our guidance that Disney Plus will achieve profitability by the end of fiscal 2024. This almost surely will be a difficult goal. Disney Plus is no longer quickly gaining new subscribers, which means that the likely road to profitability will be a combination of increased subscription fees and a reduction in production cost for content while maintaining minimal churn. Beyond the financials, a few interesting details were dropped during the earnings call. There were actually more meaningful announcements on this earnings call than there were at the D23 Expo last September. First, Iger announced that there were sequels in the works for Toy Story, Frozen, and Zootopia. I should be clear that he did not specify that these would be theatrical releases, but this announcement was made during a discussion of feature films. Second, he announced that an Avatar experience was coming to Disneyland. Again, I should be clear that at least at first, this was described as an experience, which doesn't sound like a land or an attraction or a ride. But then later, Iger seemed to make comparisons to Pandora at Animal Kingdom as the type of experience that would come to Disneyland. But even in the Q&A, he was never fully clear on this point. To put this all in blunt terms, there could be room for a full Pandora land over in the current parking lot of the Disneyland Hotel. There could be room for an e-ticket attraction at DCA, perhaps in the space once occupied by the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire experience, or perhaps Condor Flats. A holdout from the park's original concept might now be ripe for an overhaul, or it could be something much smaller, perhaps arranged into the lower portions of the Carousel Theater in Tomorrowland, especially if it was tweaked to be a space journey to Pandora, which would fit the Tomorrowland theme. But beyond this, Iger discussed the necessity of building new lands in the domestic theme parks to handle increased capacity. There were no specifics given here, but there have been a lot of ideas floated in recent years, from the Disneyland Forward artwork with the large expansion areas keyed to the parking lots at the Disneyland Hotel, to the Beyond Big Thunder artwork with its lands for Encanto, Coco, and the Disney Villains, to an expansion area at Animal Kingdom, both for a Moana area and for a Zootopia land. Again, no details were given, but what was significant here was the overall design strategy. Iger clearly favored large, themed areas to handle additional capacity rather than individual attractions, such as Cosmic Rewind and the Ratatouille ride recently opened in Epcot. Overall, it was a good day for Disney. Disney beat Wall Street estimates. The call expressed a firm vision for improvements at the company, with Iger presenting confidence that deeply exceeded that of Chapek, particularly during that disastrous November earnings call. In response, Wall Street clearly liked the material and seemed to be optimistic about Iger. Disney stock rose $7 in after-hours trading, leaping from $111 per share up to $118. But more meaningful news arrived the following morning. Jim Cramer invited Nelson Peltz onto the CNBC show Squawk on the Street to discuss the earnings call. Peltz must have sensed that between proposing his son as an alternate for the board seat and Iger structuring the earnings call around issues that were central to his Restore the Magic campaign, Trian was now in a deeply weakened position to move forward with a proxy fight. As we pointed out earlier in this episode, Jim Cramer and Nelson Peltz are friends, both having homes in South Florida. This on-screen interview would be a friendly environment if Peltz needed to walk back any element or add any new conditions to his proxy fight. But instead, Peltz simply admitted that it was now over. Now, Disney plans to do everything we wanted them to do, Peltz said. We wish the very best to Bob Iger, this management team, and the board. We will be watching, we will be rooting, and the proxy fight is over. As this was a discussion between friends, there were no probing follow-up questions asking Peltz to explain why he felt his proxy battle was either no longer winnable or no longer necessary. The obvious question here would be to ask why Peltz, who had just weeks earlier insisted that the only way for him to relinquish this proxy fight was if he were to be added to the board, which presumably would allow him to help manage the Disney company for years. But instead, Jim Cramer simply said, "Thank you for declaring victory in a gracious way. This was a huge win for you." Then Cramer shifted the conversation to ask how much money Peltz had made off of his $1 billion investment in Disney now that the stock had moved up significantly in overnight trading. The answer, though never voiced on CNBC, was that Nelson Peltz had made about $250 million minus those costs to arrange and promote the now abandoned proxy fight. The real answer, though, I suspect, as to why he gave up the fight was that after the earnings call and how Disney had shaped many answers to speak to his immediate concerns, he understood that the proxy fight was now unwinnable. In company offices that Thursday, the mood was positive. The company would avoid a proxy fight for control of the board, but layoffs were on the horizon. Layoffs that would affect every division. Josh D'Amaro, who oversees Disney Parks, sent out a note to cast members to assure them that these cuts would not impact hourly frontline cast members working in the parks. But even as an air of satisfaction settled around most Disney offices, there were other problems on the horizon. The stock price, which had risen from $111 the previous day up to now $120, had fallen again back down to $110. And in Florida, that bill to take control of the Reedy Creek Improvement District passed the House 81 votes to 31 and would soon move on to the Senate. This would almost surely be one of the next problems that the company would need to confront, a legal issue that attacked the district that Roy Disney himself had helped arrange over 55 years ago. But that, at least for now, could be put off for a few more days until the bill reached the governor's desk. You are now up to date on all Disney news for another month. And remember, there was another news-focused show a couple of episodes ago called Runaway Railway at Disneyland. If you haven't listened to that yet, it's there for you to enjoy. The story of how this attraction was designed and how it's presented in California. I'll be back next week with a new episode. As you know, we are an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions. You can support our efforts here by becoming a monthly Bandcamp subscriber. On Bandcamp, you'll find over 200 episodes not available on iTunes, but the best reason to join Bandcamp is to support the work we do here. You can become a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in the show notes. Until next time, this is Todd James Pierce.